Gather round, dear listeners, as I tell you a tale that has haunted the people of Blackwood Hollow for over a century, a place where the past refuses to stay buried and the spirits of the forgotten still whisper in the wind. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, hidden from the modern world, lies a place few dare to speak of, Blackwood Hollow. It's the kind of town where time moves slowly, where families have lived for generations, and where people keep their doors locked at night. On the surface, Blackwood Hollow is nothing more than another sleepy town tucked away in the misty hills of the east. But those who live there know better. They know about the curse, a curse older than the town itself, the legend of the Hollow. The origins of Blackwood Hollow date back to the early 1800s, when settlers pushed into the valley in search of fertile land and a fresh start. Among them was the Whitmore family, pioneers determined to carve out a new life in the wilderness. But they weren't the first to call this place home. The land had belonged to the indigenous Shawnee for centuries before the settlers arrived. Legends were passed down about a spirit, the watcher in the woods, a being neither good nor evil, simply present, a guardian of the land, watching, listening, and when disturbed, it would make its presence known. The Whitmores, like many settlers, ignored the warnings. They built their homestead on the edge of the valley, clearing the trees, hunting the game. They thought nothing of the strange markings carved into the trees, or the way the wind seemed to carry whispers at night, until the signs started. Livestock found dead, their bodies untouched, as if they had simply fallen where they stood. Strange symbols appearing on the barn overnight, painted in a substance that looked like ash, and at twilight a woman's voice singing in a language no one recognized. Then came the snowstorm, the disappearance of Abigail Whitmore. It was the winter of 1837 when young Abigail Whitmore, just 8 years old, vanished into the forest. One moment she was playing outside the house, her laughter ringing through the crisp winter air. The next, she was gone. Her mother swore she had only looked away for a moment, long enough to stoke the fire. The town searched for days, torches cutting through the icy darkness. They called her name, listening for any sound of life, but there was nothing. 3 weeks passed. Then a hunter stumbled upon something in the snow, a single footprint, far too large for any child, and beside it, Abigail's doll, resting atop the frozen ground, untouched by the elements. The Whitmores left soon after, abandoning their land, their home, everything. And yet, they say Abigail never truly left. The watcher in the woods. As the years passed, Blackwood Hollow grew, but the legend of Abigail and the watcher in the woods never faded. Some claim to see a little girl standing at the edge of the forest, her dress fluttering in the wind. When called to, she would simply turn and vanish into the trees. Others spoke of eerie lights flickering between the trunks at night, moving in ways no lantern or fire ever could. And then there were the voices, whispers carried by the wind, calling names. The people of Blackwood Hollow learned to ignore them, till Joseph Langley came, the surveyor's fate. In 1922, Joseph Langley was sent to map the valley. A man of reason and science, he dismissed the town's warnings as superstition. Determined to prove there was nothing to fear, he set up camp near the ruins of the old Whitmore house. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Weeks later, his horse was found wandering near the edge of town, still saddled, still carrying his supplies. But Langley was nowhere to be found. A search party scoured the woods. They found his journal half buried in the mud. The last entry read, "It watches, it listens. I can feel it breathing." The townsfolk sealed the journal away, locked in a wooden chest in the town hall. No one has opened it since. The curse lives on. Over the years, more stories surfaced. Hikers who ventured too deep into the hollow came back, changed. Eyes hollow, hands shaking, refusing to speak of what they had seen. A group of teenagers once dared each other to spend the night in the woods. They brought cameras, flashlights, and bravado. By morning, they were different. One refused to speak. Another woke up with deep scratches down his arms, though there was no sign of an animal nearby. The last, the boldest among them, whispered only one thing before leaving town for good. She was there, standing at my feet, watching me sleep. To this day, the ruins of the Whitmore house remain, hidden beneath the overgrown vines. No one dares rebuild. No one dares go near, because those who live in Blackwood Hollow know the truth. They know the curse is real. So if you ever find yourself wandering too close to that quiet little town, if you hear a child's laughter drifting through the trees, if you see a figure standing at the edge of the woods watching, turn around, walk away, and whatever you do, don't follow her.
Some nightmares don't come from dreams. Some horrors don't crawl out of the woods or emerge from haunted houses. Some have been with you all along, waiting. Tonight I'll tell you about the Shadow Collector, a figure seen by those who are about to disappear. It doesn't hunt like a normal predator. It doesn't chase. It simply watches, waiting for the moment you notice it, and once you do, it's already too late. The first recorded case, the first known report of the Shadow Collector, dates back to 1912, deep in the coal mines of Pennsylvania. A miner named Thomas Reed started noticing something strange during his shifts underground. At first, it was subtle. His shadow seemed to linger for a split second when he moved, stretching unnaturally along the cavern walls. Then, it got worse. One night, as the miners finished their shift, Thomas turned to say something to a co-worker and noticed something impossible. His shadow was still facing the tunnel behind him. He froze. The air around him felt thick, like something unseen was pressing against his skin. The other miners noticed his hesitation. "You all right, Reed?" one of them asked. Thomas didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the ground. His shadow had started moving on its own. It twitched, its fingers stretching unnaturally long before curling inward, as if grasping for something. He ran. The other miners didn't know why, but panic is contagious. They scrambled for the exit, feeling the crushing weight of the mine closing in behind them. The next morning, Thomas didn't show up for work. When his foreman sent someone to check on him, they found his front door ajar, his boots neatly placed beside his bed. His breakfast plate sat untouched on the table. But Thomas, gone, and in his bedroom, burned into the wall like a stain, was his shadow. It was stretched unnaturally, arms raised, fingers splayed wide, as if frozen in a final desperate struggle. The local papers called it a mystery. The town whispered of ghosts, but the miners, they never spoke of it again. More cases surface. Over the next century, more cases emerged. 1928, New Orleans. A woman named Celeste Moreau told her friends that her shadow had begun to lag behind her, like an afterimage that took a second too long to catch up. 2 days later, she vanished from her locked apartment. Police found no signs of forced entry, only her shadow, still cast on the bedroom floor, stretched unnaturally long. 1956, Nebraska. A 6-year-old boy cried to his mother that his shadow had too many fingers. The next morning, his bed was empty. His room was untouched, but when the sun rose, His shadow remained imprinted on the wall, without him. 1984, London. A security guard reviewing CCTV footage at an office building noticed something disturbing. A man walked into the elevator alone, but his shadow didn't follow. Instead, it stood still in the hallway, as if watching him leave. The man was never seen again. The pattern was always the same. 1. The victim noticed something was wrong with their shadow. 2. The shadow began moving independently or showing unnatural features. 3. Within 72 hours, the person vanished, leaving only a shadow behind. A dangerous experiment. In 2009, a group of paranormal researchers tried to investigate the phenomenon. Dr. Evelyn Carter, a professor of folklore at a small university, had spent years collecting stories of shadow-related disappearances. She believed the shadow collector was not just legend, it was something real. Her team set up an experiment in an abandoned warehouse known for strange sightings. The plan was simple: record the shadows of each team member over the course of 3 nights. At first, nothing happened. The researchers set up infrared cameras, motion detectors, and light sources to track any unusual movement. They took turns observing each other's shadows, documenting even the smallest anomalies. Then on the second night, something changed. Dr. Carter's assistant, Mark Evans, was reviewing footage from the first night when he noticed an unsettling detail. At 2:37 a.m., while the team was asleep, the camera picked up movement in the far corner of the warehouse. But it wasn't a person, it was a shadow. A tall, thin silhouette detached itself from the far wall and shifted across the room without any source to cast it. Mark rewound the footage, playing it over and over. There were no footsteps, no sound, just that shadow moving on its own. Then a horrifying realization sank in. The shadow had approached their sleeping bags and stopped beside Dr. Carter. It stood there for exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds, watching. The next morning, Mark showed the footage to the team. Dr. Carter dismissed it as an artifact, claiming it must have been a camera glitch or a trick of the light. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in the room with them. That night, he woke up to whispering. It was faint, almost like the sound of wind through a crack in a door. But as he sat up, his body stiff with fear, he realized something was wrong. The shadows cast by the dim emergency light weren't behaving normally. They stretched too far up the walls, curling unnaturally at the edges. And then he saw it. His shadow moved without him. Mark scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in panicked gasps. The others were still asleep, unaware. He stepped back, but his shadow did not follow. Instead, it slowly lifted one arm and pointed toward the exit. Mark bolted. He sprinted out of the warehouse, not stopping until he reached his car. His hands were shaking as he turned the key, his headlights cutting through the darkness. And that's when he saw it. Standing just beyond the reach of the headlights in the center of the road was a shadow, not attached to anything, not cast by anyone, just standing there, waiting. The aftermath. Mark never returned to the experiment. He drove straight home, locked his doors, and refused to answer his phone. When Dr. Carter and the team went back to retrieve their equipment the next morning, he wasn't with them, and by that evening, he was gone. His apartment was untouched. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. Just his shadow burned into the hardwood floor, his hands raised in a silent, frozen scream. After that, Dr. Carter disbanded the research team. She refused to speak about what happened, denied the footage ever existed. A year later, she resigned from the university and disappeared from public life. Some say she went into hiding. Others believe her shadow finally caught up to her. Theories and warnings. No one knows exactly what the shadow collector is. Some believe it's a being that feeds on identity, stealing the very essence of its victims. Others think it's something far older, a presence that exists in the space between light and darkness, waiting for the moment someone notices it. But the most chilling theory, that once you become aware of the shadow collector, it becomes aware of you. Final warning, so if you ever notice your shadow behaving strangely, if it moves when you don't, if it lags behind, if it suddenly seems too still, don't look away. And whatever you do, don't let it catch you, because once it does, you'll never be seen again.